In this video, we're going to talk about decimal numbers, particularly tenths and hundredths. So this square right here represents one whole. Now, if I were to take my one whole and divide it to 10 equal pieces, it would look like this. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 columns. And my whole has been divided into 10 equal pieces. So if I were to shade one of these 10 pieces, let's shade one piece of these 10 pieces. I could write that as a fraction. That is 1/10. It means one part is shaded out of 10 parts. And I could write that also as decimal. So in writing in decimal, so we have to start with 0 because there is no whole, and then decimal point, and then 1 out of 10 or one part shaded. So I got 1/10. So this one behind this decimal represents the 10th place. So this 1/10 is the same with this fraction and the same with this picture. Now let's try shading some more tenths. So now I'll go ahead and shade 7/10. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I have 7 out of 10 pieces shaded, so I'll write that as 7/10. And in decimal, I can write that as 0 because there is no whole shaded, decimal point, and then followed by 7. 7 represents the 7 parts shaded in this picture. So again, this 7/10 is the same as this fraction and also the same as this picture. So we have 7/10 in decimal, 7/10 in fraction, and 7/10 in picture. Now let's try to write the following pictures into fractions and decimals. Let's start with the first picture. How many parts are shaded? So there are 2 columns shaded, so we can write that as 2 out of 10 or 2/10. And in decimal, we can write that as 0, decimal point, and 2 because there is no whole or complete square shaded. So we have to write 0 followed by decimal point and 2. Now next one. How many parts of the rectangle are shaded? So we have 9 out of 10 parts. So we can write that in decimal as 0 because there is no complete rectangle shaded, followed by the decimal point and 9. Next, how many parts of the rectangle are shaded? So we have 5 parts shaded out of 10, 5 out of 10 parts. So we write that in fraction as 5/10, and in decimal, we write it as 0.5 or 5/10. Now let's say I wanted to have even smaller pieces. Suppose I want to divide my whole into even smaller pieces. Well, I could take each of these 10 and divide them into 10 equal pieces. I would have this picture. Now my whole has been divided into 100 little blocks because there are 10 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And there are 10 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And 10 times 10 is 100. So let me shade some blocks here. So now I have 21 blocks shaded. That is 21 out of 100ths, or we can say that as 21 hundredths. I can write that in decimal as 0, there is no complete square shaded, and 21. So we can read this as 21 hundredths, and in fraction, it can be written as 21 hundredths. Notice that in the 21 hundredths, there is a 2 in the tenths place, which corresponds with 1, 2 complete columns, this column. So this is 2 tenths. And this one, which is in the hundredths place, represent 100 that was shaded in. Now let's try to get the equivalent of the following pictures to fractions and decimals. Let's start with the first picture. So we have one complete column shaded, so that is 1/10, and there are 8 parts shaded next to that column. So we have 10 plus 8, that is 18. So we have 18 out of 100. So we can say that it is 18 hundredths, and in decimal, we can write that as 0.18. Now let's go to the second example. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 complete columns, so that is equivalent to 50, and 4 parts, so 50 plus 4 is 54 out of 100, so that is 54 hundredths. And in decimal, we can write it as 0.54. Now the last example, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are only 7 out of 100 parts shaded. So we can say that as 7 hundredths. And in decimal, we can write it as 0.07. Notice that 0 represents the tenths, but there is no complete column shaded in this picture. So that's why it's 0. And there are only 7 parts shaded, so we have 7 hundredths. Now let's read decimal numbers using a place value chart. So on the left part is the place value for whole numbers. These are whole numbers. And on the right part is the place value for decimal numbers. So as you notice, tenths and hundredths sounds a lot like tenths and hundredths over here, but they are pronounced differently. So you will see that the endings are different. THS, THS. Okay? So this places is less than the whole numbers. This decimal places is less than the whole numbers. Because as you know, when we go to the left of the place value chart, our value increases. If we go here to the left, it is more than 1, or the value increases. Now, if we go to the right, the values will be decreasing. So it is less than 1. Now let's try filling up this place value chart with numbers. So let me write here 1.3. So I can read that as 1 and 3 tenths. Now let me write here 12.05. So I can read that as 12. So this is 12. Decimal point is read as and 5 hundredths. If I'm going to write here 0, it means there is no whole number. 0.3, so that is 3 tenths. Now let's try to find the fraction and decimal equivalents of the following pictures. Now let's first count the number of wholes. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So there are 11 wholes. Okay. Now this part, there are only 3 parts shaded out of 10. So we write it as 3/10. So we have 11 and 3/10. Now how are we going to write it in decimal? So we're going to write first the whole number, which is 11, and then decimal point followed by this 3 parts out of 10. So we have 11 and 3/10. So this 11 and 3/10 is the same with this mixed number. Now let's proceed to the next example. First, let's count the numbers of squares that are completely shaded. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that will be our whole number. And in this part, there are only 10, 20, 30, 35 out of 100 parts shaded. So we have 7 as our whole number, and 35/100ths is our fraction. So we have 7 and 35/100ths. And in writing this fraction into decimal, we will take 7 as our whole number, followed by a decimal point, and then write 35 after the decimal point. So we can read this as 7 and 35/100ths. Now let's have some more examples for converting fractions into decimals without having the pictures. Okay, so we have 2 and 3/10. So first, let us get the whole number, which is 2, followed by a decimal point, and then just write the numerator, which is 3. So we have 2 and 3/10, or 2.3. Now the next one, we have 4, so that will be our whole number, followed by a decimal point, and then let's get the numerator, which is 8. So we read this as 4 and 8/10, or 4.8. Now, let's have the next example. There is no whole number. No whole number here, so we have to write 0. If there is no whole number, we have to write 0, and then let's get the numerator, which is 9. So we have 0.9, or 9/10. Next, we have 16/100, 16 over 100. So we don't have any whole number here, so we will write 0. And then let's get the numerator, which is 16. So that is 16/100ths. Now, for the second example, we have 15. Our whole number is 15. So let's write 15 followed by a decimal point. Then let's write the numerator, which is 35. So we have 15 and 35/100ths. 15 and 35/100ths. Last one. So we have 12 as our whole number. So let's write 12 followed by a decimal point, and we have 9 out of 100. So we have to write 0 here and 9. So we have 12 and 9/100ths. Now let's go on writing decimals from numeric form into Word. So let's have the following examples. So you can write decimals in words into 2 ways. So for example, our first example is 2/10. So we can write that as 2/10, the same as fraction, or we can write that as 2 as 0.2. Okay. Now let's go to the second example. So we can write that as in fraction form. So we have 4 and 1/10, or we can write it as 4.1. Let's have the next example. We have 6 and 3/10. So again, you can write it like fraction. How you say the fraction, you can write it the same way in words. So we have 6 and 3/10. Or we can also write it in decimal like 6.3. Let's go to the examples for hundredths. First one, we have 24 hundredths. So we can write that as 24 hundredths. 24 hundredths. Or we can write 0.24. Next, we have 1 and 18 hundredths. So let's write it like in fraction form, 1 and 18 hundredths. Or we can write it also like 1.18. Let's go to the last one. We have 3 and 45 hundredths. Or we can write it as 3.45. Thank you all for watching and see you again next week for another lesson.